Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Let everyone who believes in peace give a shout out. Yes! Yes!
1 o'clock, we went straight to the White House. And when we got there, there were not a lot of people there, but what was overwhelming was the military presence, the police presence. It was, the first day they put up those temporary barriers, and the protesters started moving those, so they put up an 8-foot fence, and they would allow the protesters to go up to the fence, and the 8-foot fence was all the way along the street from one corner to the next. And so then when we got there the following day, they had blocked off every intersection all around the White House, so you couldn't get close to the White House, not even to the fence that they had put up. And what I thought was heavy-handed, all of them had military weapons. It was the National Guard, and I think some of them were, I'm guessing D.C. police and some Secret Service, where they had the tear gas guns out, and it was just I thought it was ridiculous, to be honest with you. And I'm doing some research now on the criminalization of protests, how they need more appropriate responses to peaceful protests. They don't need that strong show of force, because 85% of these protests are peaceful. It's only late at night, and then even now the protesters are policing themselves, making sure that no one's there to do vandalism. And so I think that we've got to really push back on the police and saying, you don't need to respond. This is asking for trouble. So we stayed there for about an hour. And then we decided, this guy walked by and said, well, there's a protest going on at the Capitol. So we got on the metro and went across town to the Capitol. And there were a lot of young people. It was very informal, but it was packed. And that presence was different for the police. They had put up the temporary barriers as well, and they were standing behind them, but had a much different look. They all had face protection on. It was very relaxed. They weren't standing arm to arm like the folk at the White House were. These were Capitol Police who are used to protest. And it was the most peaceful protest I've ever been to. The students were sitting around, they were talking. As a matter of fact, there were, I would dare say, about 1,500 people there. And you couldn't see, you saw the first set of pictures I had were students sitting out on the grass. That group was kind of chilling. They had come over, but it was like, okay, we're out and it's beautiful. But there were at least 300-400 students on that side. And then when you walk to where the barrier was, there were a bunch of students there. But it was powerful. They were talking, they had signs up, and they had formed little clusters, looked like they were study groups where they were talking about what was going on, processing. They were all sitting in circles. And I don't know whether they were doing planning, but mostly it looked like they were doing processing, talking about, why are you here? What does this mean to you? And you could walk freely around. A lot of college students, Howard had a very strong presence there. I think HBCU students, I talked with one from Clark, Atlanta. That one was really, I think that was very family oriented. Again, but mostly college students. So we stayed there for a couple hours. And then we got back on the train and went back to the White House. So we went on the side of 16th Street where the church is, the St. John's Episcopal. So they had a barricade set up there, and literally was a barricade. They had trucks at the intersection, the military vehicles, and then they had a layer of National Guard and police in between them. And then they had a barrier, they had a wall of National Guard standing arm in arm along with police, literally preventing even crossing the street. So that's where the demonstration happened, and it was packed. I mean, it was at least 1,000 people out there.
Can you talk a little bit about your motivations for participating in the protest and why you see this as a matter of faith?
Yeah, I think that I was very relieved to see several clergy out yesterday, and most of us had our collars on. Whenever I go to a protest dealing with issues of justice, I want people to know that I'm clergy. I think it's important for people to see the presence of clergy, but more so of spiritual leaders, that they connect us with spirituality, because that's the disconnect. People are not connected to the church, but people are very connected with the issue of spirituality. They want to know that God is a God of justice, and that's what drives me, is that God is very concerned about justice issues. Whenever people are being mistreated, wherever there is oppression, wherever there are minority groups who are being persecuted, these are issues that the church has a direct connection to, because in the Reformed faith, we define God twofold: God of love and a God of justice. And they're pretty equal. You know, we don't hold one over the other. We say you can't be a person, you can't be a Christian if you don't love others. You're not willing to serve others. And Jesus even said, willing to die for others. And so there's a direct connection. And I think people they really have a misunderstanding of their spiritual connection with life if they don't see themselves as a person of faith who is directly engaged in issues of justice. You know, we're called to be out in the public arena. We're called to make sure that the world reflects the kingdom of God, and as King would say, the beloved kingdom. We're called to understand that we can't live just for ourselves, that if I have what I need, that I need to ensure that everyone has what they need in order to survive, that there are basic necessities of life that every human being is deserving of. The opportunity to work, the opportunity to provide for yourself, the opportunity to have health care and to take your child to the doctor if that child is sick without worrying about whether you can afford it or not. The opportunity to human dignity and respect, and to feel that you are valued. So there's just an intimate connection in my thinking between what's going on out in the world and being a child of God.
Why do you think this issue is speaking so strongly to young people?
I think, you know, I've done some reflection on that. I think because of what they have experienced politically, these are Obama's children. They grew up, their formative years were under Obama. And to go from Obama to Trump, I think is a it's a frightening experience for them. To see, and you saw that Obama tried to resurrect some of that yesterday with his talk on hope, because that was what he resonated. He wanted to be a very hopeful, positive, energizing presence in their lives. And I think he was. I think they really loved Barack Obama. And you see the response of college students when he ran. It was just, they really got him over the top. College students, the work that they did. So when Trump came in, a complete reversal. And the first thing he did was to attack immigrants and to basically his first immigration ban. And I think that they are responding to that in horror, in disbelief, and in outrage. I think they are outraged at where the country is right now. I think that they are outraged at what's happening. I think they have a greater sensitivity to racial justice. I think they grew up in a different time than many of us who are 50 and above, who experienced segregation and Jim Crow. I think that this is not the world that they grew up in, and this is not the world that they want to live in. And it's amazing. The protests yesterday were obviously in response to the murder of George Floyd, but over half of the chants were against Trump, not against the government, but they were calling Trump out by name. And so I think they are responding very strongly to the atmosphere that he has created of hatred and divisiveness in this country. I think that this is not the type of America they want to live in. And again, I think they've had enough. They have had enough. And it's powerful. It's gotten larger each day.
What has to happen in order for the protests to end, and should they end?
I don't think they should end. As long as they're peaceful, I'm hoping that this will give momentum to the elections. and that this will, one, energize young adults to vote, because they are a precarious voting population. You know, they don't necessarily have large numbers in voter participation. I hope that they will continue to demand change, because what's happening now, and what I think is a positive sign, is that I do think something different is happening politically in this country. When you look at the governors, especially the governor of Minnesota, he's a Democrat, but his last statement was that this is possibly the last chance that we're going to have to implement some systemic change in this country. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But to me, it's saying, you know, in the Black community, we always say, well, you know, when you have these protests and you have, especially if you have violence, all of a sudden everyone's paying attention, people want to talk, but then things go back to normal. So I'm hoping that they will start to implement some legislation on the local level and the state level, which is very meaningful, which is very progressive, which is right now one of the biggest issues I have a concern about, is that the Trump administration and the Justice Department are trying to stop the mail-in ballots. I think that's going to be key for the November election. And so if we can make sure that they are letting their members of Congress know that they want mail-in ballots access, letting their state legislators and the governors know that we think that this is mandatory. We've got to be able to do this. So what I'm hoping is that out of this, that the protests do continue in a very peaceful manner, but they continue to let people know that it's time for a change.
This past week, a lot of people have been getting out there for the first time. And you know, one thing that really occurred to me when I went out last weekend was there is a difference between a march, you know, that's kind of organized around a certain issue, and a protest. What would you tell people who are heading out for the first time, who see this happening, want to get involved, and what they should do to prepare, and what they should do while they're out there?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's a big difference between a march and a protest. Marches are generally led by an organization or an individual, and there's a lot more, I think, planning that's gone into it. They're usually pretty structured. You know, we're going to get a permit, we're going to walk down the street, we're going to get the police to guide us down. And even the ones that don't have, they say, well, we didn't get police permission. They still let the police know that they're coming, you know, because we don't want a mistake. So there's that different level of organization. And it's interesting that you said that to me, because that's what I noticed about yesterday. There was a sense that no one was in charge yesterday. And so I noticed, and I at a point I was glad, but at another point I saw some of the young men in particular in the group confronting the police very strongly and very personally. And I thought that that with more organization, that you sometimes do need a voice that everyone's going to listen to, calm down. Because I do think that was not helpful for what was trying to be done. They were really, I think, arguing beyond something other than the those individual policemen there. So you need to know what's going to happen. You definitely need to be informed about how it's being done. You need to make sure you can contact individuals who have been out and let them know. I will say for most of the demonstrations, they have been very peaceful. And I think, again, most of the people who are coming out want them to be peaceful. I would set a time limit on myself. I said, well, you know, once it starts getting dark, and if there's a curfew in particular, then those are going to be signs that you might not want to hang around. I also think that, you know, you need to do what you feel comfortable with. Don't feel that you have to go out and stay out all day and participate all day, but you don't have to be down at the front lines. There are boundaries that are set up around the side where people are very much observing. There was something that I thought was unnecessary yesterday with two children in front of me and my daughter, elementary age children. I would not have had my children because they were right in the heart of where the confrontation with these young men and the police was. And I wanted them to be removed from that area. And so, like everything, you want to try to be as informed as possible, but also know that when you go out, you're going out for a reason of lifting your voice, to stand in unity with other individuals who are concerned about what's going on around us. But you got to be informed, and especially if you plan on, if there's a situation where there's civil disobedience. Now, there's not been any civil disobedience, which I think was a smart move with any of the protests that have been going on. But once things, gear back up again, and then the Poor People's Campaign gears up, there will be actions of civil disobedience. And if you plan on participating, you need to know what's going to happen. To get trained, because they say don't take anything in which you don't take your cell phone, because they're going to confiscate all of that. Just take your identification, maybe $50 if you're in D.C. so you can pay the citation. But D.C. is different from most of the areas in the country. D.C. Capitol Police are used to protests. That you come in, you get a citation written. As a matter of fact, lately they've not even been putting the little plastic cuffs on you. They just take you over to the grass and write you a citation, and you go home and you don't have to come back to court. In Raleigh, North Carolina, you go to jail. And so you need to know what's going to happen if there will be civil disobedience. But a lot of it has to do with making sure that you try, if you can, try to read articles and find out exactly what's the nature of the engagement you're looking for.
Okay. So do you think the protests and so forth that are going on, and just the general mood of the country bodes well for ecumenical collaboration? Do you see more of that happening, and do you think that will continue after this period that we're in?
Yes, and yes. It really, when I came into this office, the president and I came in at the same time, literally the same month. And the ecumenical interfaith interaction increased. And that's what I heard from individuals who have been here for longer than I have. So the ecumenical engagement is at an all-time high right now. It really is. We have an organization in D.C. called the Washington Interreligious Staff Community, and we are just engaging with each other. As a matter of fact, there's a paper that we're working on right now to issue a statement against the death of Mr. Floyd and also racial injustice. There's something that's going on. As a matter of fact, I get so many cross postings that I can really only deal with one or two. So every day. And so, yes, the level is extremely high. And that's one thing I will say for the current political climate, is that it has increased our cooperation with one another. I just don't see any downside to that. I do think being in DC is most of my engagement is with the mainline denominations. I do think we need to be much more intentional about reaching out to the traditional African-American denominations, the CMEs, the AME Zions, the AMEs, and the Baptists, because they don't have Washington offices. So we're not in communications with them. So I do think we need to be much more intentional about making sure there's a more expansive outreach that we have. But as far as the groups that we have here right now, oh yes, I've never seen it to such a degree, because we ministers don't always play well together with each other. And so I am overly excited at what we're doing.
Going anywhere. That's right. We are not going anywhere. We are not going anywhere. We are